Bloodstained Hearth, Chapter 1. Inheritance. Dr. Laura Brennan stood at the edge of the small remote town in northern Scotland, taking in her new inheritance. She had been expecting an antique book, or perhaps a prized painting from her late aunt, but never in her wildest dreams did she imagine this. A sprawling ancient property sat nestled between two brooding hills, its ivy-covered walls looming over the narrow road, like a guardian of secrets buried deep within the earth. The wind whistled through the crumbling stonework, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decaying foliage, as if to welcome her into this dark world. Laura was no stranger to rural properties. She had spent countless hours in remote corners of the globe, studying local myths and legends for her academic pursuits. Yet there was something about this place that felt different, almost oppressive. It wasn't the isolation or the age-worn walls. It was the sense of unease that settled over her like a suffocating shroud. A shiver ran down her spine as she stepped off the worn path and onto the blood-stained hearth at the center of this mysterious estate. "Dr. Brennan," called a voice from behind her. She turned to see Marcus Thorne, a local historian with a sharp gaze and a weathered face. His presence was not entirely unexpected. Laura had corresponded with him about the property's history in preparation for her visit, but something about his demeanor today seemed off, as if he were hiding something more than just knowledge. "Yes," she replied, trying to conceal her unease beneath a veneer of professional detachment. "I'm Dr. Laura Brennan." Marcus nodded solemnly, his eyes darting around the property as if searching for something unseen. "I'm Marcus Thorne," he said in a voice that echoed through the empty air. "I hope you don't mind me being here. I was curious to meet the person who inherited this unique place." Laura couldn't help but notice the way his gaze lingered on the property, as if it were an old friend he hadn't seen in years. There was a certain reverence in his tone that seemed out of place given their academic discussion about local history and folklore. But then again, perhaps she was just projecting her own discomfort onto him. "Of course not," she replied diplomatically, trying to hide her growing unease behind a polite smile. "I'm here to learn more about the property and its connection to Scottish folklore." Marcus nodded, his eyes never leaving the property. "Well, there's certainly no lack of material here. This place has seen some dark days in its time." His voice took on a haunted quality that sent a shiver down Laura's spine. "Can you tell me more about those dark days?" she asked, trying to mask her growing apprehension with academic curiosity. Marcus looked at her thoughtfully before speaking again. "It was once the site of a brutal massacre," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "A group of Highlanders were slaughtered here by English troops during the Jacobite Rebellion of 1745. Many believe that their spirits still linger on this land, seeking justice for their untimely demise." Laura raised an eyebrow at his dramatic recounting of events. "And you believe this to be true?" she asked skeptically. As a scientist, her training left her instinctively predisposed to doubt such seemingly improbable claims. "I don't know what to believe," Marcus admitted quietly, "but there have been reports over the years, strange noises, apparitions, things that can't be explained by Laura tried to ignore his words, but something about them gnawed at the back of her mind, refusing to be ignored. As they continued their tour of the property, she found herself drawn to the darker corners of its history, desperate for any clues that might explain the seemingly inexplicable phenomena reported by locals. The first such clue came as they approached one of the older outbuildings on the estate. Laura had been focusing on the ruins when a sudden gust of wind sent a shower of dead leaves swirling around her feet. Startled, she turned to Marcus for an explanation, only to find him staring at her intently with a look of pure dread in his eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to maintain composure. The room's oppressive silence was broken only by the soft whirring of an ancient air conditioning unit and the steady drip of a leaky faucet. A stale metallic odor hung in the air, mixing with the faint aroma of dust and decay. Outside, the setting sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, creating an eerie, dimly lit tableau. The sound of distant traffic barely penetrated the thick walls of the decrepit building. Marcus nodded slowly, his gaze still locked onto the leaves that danced around their feet like restless spirits. I think so," he stammered, visibly shaken by whatever had just occurred. "But I can't shake this feeling. This sense of dread that seems to follow us everywhere we go." Laura glanced back at the outbuilding, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she should dismiss his words as nothing more than an overactive imagination, fueled by years of listening to supernatural tales. But deep down, She couldn't help but feel that there was something much darker lurking beneath the surface of this place. As they continued their exploration of the property, Laura found herself increasingly drawn into the realm of the unknown. Each new discovery seemed to confirm what Marcus had told her earlier, that this place was haunted not only by ghosts of the past, but also by something far more sinister and malevolent. And as she delved deeper into the mystery surrounding the blood-stained hearth, Laura began to realize just how much was at stake in uncovering the truth behind this ancient estate. But what was it that truly lay beneath the surface? As she stood on the cracked stone floor of the old outbuilding, feeling the cold wind whispering through her hair, Laura couldn't help but wonder if there were hidden depths to this place that even she could not begin to fathom. Chapter 2. Local Whispers. Laura spent hours poring over old books, scrolling through online archives, and delving into the annals of Scottish folklore. Every piece of information she found only deepened the mystery surrounding the blood-stained hearth. It seemed that this place was steeped in a darkness that refused to be ignored, a darkness that had been part of its history for centuries. As she read about the Jacobite Rebellion of 1745, a sense of unease crept through her. The story of the Highlanders, who were slaughtered here by English forces, seemed to echo through the empty halls and crumbling walls of the estate. It was as if the blood that had been shed here all those years ago still lingered in the air, staining the very soil with its bitterness. But it wasn't just the massacre that haunted this place. There were whispers of other dark deeds committed within its walls. Laura found tales of witchcraft, demonic possession, and even human sacrifice, each one more chilling than the last. She began to wonder if these stories were simply the product of an overactive imagination, or if there was some truth hidden beneath their terrifying. As she continued her research, Laura stumbled upon a reference to a mythical creature known as the Red Cap. According to local legends, this malevolent spirit had been responsible for many of the strange occurrences reported on the estate over the years. The more she read about it, the more convinced she became that there was some truth to these stories, even if they did seem implausible at first glance. It was during one of her late-night research sessions that Laura decided to reach out to Marcus Thorne again. She needed someone who could help her navigate the murky waters of Scottish folklore and shed light on the dark corners of this estate's history. So, after exchanging a few tentative messages with him over email, they agreed to meet up at the local library, where he could share his knowledge with her. When they finally met, it was clear that Marcus had been waiting for this moment just as eagerly as Laura herself. He was eager to show her everything he knew about the Red Cap and other supernatural entities said to inhabit the estate. But as they delved deeper into their conversation, Laura found herself increasingly skeptical of his claims. Her words were measured and deliberate, masking the skepticism that churned beneath the surface of her thoughts. The Red Cap's reputation preceded it, but she had learned to be wary of relying solely on second-hand accounts, especially in a world where truth could be as malleable as a fresh piece of clay. Marcus nodded solemnly. "It's true that some of the stories may be exaggerated, or even fabricated," he admitted slowly, as if afraid of offending her scientific sensibility. "But there are others that have been passed down through generations. Tales told by people who claim to have seen the Red Cap with their own eyes." Laura tried not to let her skepticism override her curiosity as she prepared for their overnight stay at the estate. She assembled a collection of equipment, cameras, audio recorders, and other tools designed to detect and document potential paranormal phenomena. With Marcus by her side, they would spend the night in the supposedly haunted house, armed with the intent to uncover the truth behind its reputation. As darkness fell, they made their way to the grand estate, its imposing silhouette looming against the night sky. Laura's heart quickened as they entered the foyer, the creaking floorboards and chill air intensifying her unease. The old house seemed to watch them warily, its very walls holding secrets. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grounds of the estate, Laura and Marcus made their way back to one of the older outbuildings. They settled into their respective corners, each keeping a watchful eye on the other as they waited for anything strange to happen. The first few hours were uneventful, but then things started to take a turn for the worse. Laura felt a cold draft rush against her face, followed by the sound of footsteps echoing through the empty halls. She turned to Marcus in panic, only to find him staring back at her with wide eyes and an expression of pure terror on his face. She whispered fearfully, "What is it? Is that?" Marcus nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's the Red Cap," he said hoarsely, his eyes locked onto something invisible but incredibly malevolent lurking in the shadows. "I can feel its presence here. It's drawn to our fear." Laura tried not to let her terror get the better of her. She could see it now, clear as day. The red cap was real, and it wanted nothing more than to bring about its own brand of destruction on this estate. As they huddled together in fear, Laura began to wonder what it would take to finally rid the blood-stained hearth of this terrible curse once and for all. She knew that she couldn't do it alone, not against an entity as powerful and malevolent as the red cap, but with Marcus by her side, they just might stand a chance of overcoming their greatest fears and restoring peace to this haunted place. And so began their journey into the unknown, driven by a shared determination to uncover the truth about the estate's dark history and free it from the clutches of the red cap once and for all. Little did they know that their quest would lead them down a path filled with danger, betrayal, and ultimate redemption. But only if they were willing to face their deepest fears and embrace the power within themselves to overcome evil. Chapter 3. Historical Depths. Laura spent her days scouring the dusty archives of the local library, searching for any mention of the red cap in historical records. Her findings were fragmented at best. A series of cryptic entries written by early settlers who had encountered the creature in their travels. One such record read, "He came with a blood-red cloak and eyes that gleamed like fire. He spoke not a word, but his presence was enough to send shivers down my spine." It seemed more than just an elusive legend. It had been terrorizing these lands for centuries, leaving behind a trail of destruction and despair. Laura couldn't help but feel a deep sense of responsibility towards those who had suffered at the hands of this malevolent creature. She vowed to uncover its true nature and devise a plan to end its reign of terror once and for all. Marcus, on the other hand, was steeped in local folklore, regaling Laura with stories of past encounters with the red cap. He spoke of an ancient prophecy that foretold the rise of a powerful sorceress who would one day confront the creature and free her people from its grip. According to legend, this sorceress would possess extraordinary powers, capable of overcoming even the most formidable of foes. As they delved deeper into their research, Laura began to sense a growing tension between them, an almost palpable energy that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the estate itself. She could feel the weight of centuries-old trauma seeping through the cracks in the old stones and into her bones, leaving her with a profound sense of unease. The air grew thick with tension as Laura and Marcus delved further into the history of the estate. Ancient whispers seemed to brush against her skin, carrying echoes of long-buried secrets. The parchment in her hands trembled slightly, its edges yellowed with age and stained by generations of hands that had touched it before her own. She caught Marcus's eye, his gaze mirroring her unease. The candlelight flickered ominously, casting dancing shadows across the dusty tomes that surrounded them. In spite of this, she pressed onward, determined to unravel the mysteries that lay hidden beneath the surface of these historical documents. One afternoon, while poring over an ancient manuscript detailing the red cap's origins, she stumbled upon something truly remarkable, a description of a ritual that could potentially bind the creature and render it powerless. The ritual involved sacrificing 3 pure souls, individuals who had never known the touch of fear or malice in their lives. It was said that these souls would serve as anchors, preventing the red cap from unleashing its full wrath upon the world. But such a sacrifice came with a price. Only someone possessing extraordinary power could perform it without perishing in the process. Laura hesitated for a moment before turning to Marcus with a look of sheer determination etched on her face. "We have to find those 3 pure souls," she declared, her voice trembling with excitement and dread. "If we can carry out this ritual, maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to put an end to all this." Marcus nodded solemnly, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and apprehension. He knew that what they were attempting was nothing short of impossible, but he also understood the gravity of their situation. If they didn't succeed in their quest, then the red cap would continue to wreak havoc on these lands for generations to come. Over the next few weeks, Laura and Marcus dedicated themselves to locating the 3 pure souls needed for the ritual. They scoured the countryside, searching high and low for anyone who might possess the required qualities. However, despite their best efforts, they encountered nothing but dead ends and false leads. It was during one particularly fruitless expedition that Laura stumbled upon something truly remarkable, a hidden chamber beneath the estate, accessible only through a secret passageway concealed behind a bookshelf in the library. The room itself was stark and unadorned, save for an ancient altar adorned with symbols she couldn't begin to decipher. As she stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, Laura felt as if she were on the brink of discovering something truly momentous. A revelation that would change everything they thought they knew about the Red Cap and its connection to the estate's dark past. But first, she needed to find Marcus and share her discovery with him. When he finally arrived at the library, his eyes widened in disbelief as he took in the sight before them. "This must be it," he whispered reverently, his voice filled with awe and wonder. "The very chamber where our ancestors performed the ritual to bind the Red Cap." As they stood there, surrounded by centuries-old echoes of fear and desperation, Laura experienced an inexplicable connection to those who had come before. The weight of history pressed down on her, heavy with stories of individuals who had fought valiantly against the forces of darkness in their quest for freedom and redemption. She understood then that they were part of something much larger than themselves. They were the embodiment of hope in a world beset by fear and despair. They spent countless hours researching the necessary components and incantations required to carry it out successfully. But as the days passed and the deadline for their quest drew ever closer, they began to realize that something was amiss. A hidden truth that threatened to undo all their efforts in one fell swoop. As they stood at the altar on the night of the full moon, prepared to sacrifice themselves in order to complete the ritual, Laura suddenly felt a surge of primal energy coursing through her veins. She sensed an ancient and powerful presence, its awareness brushing against the boundaries of her consciousness. And then, without warning, it burst into her mind, a vision so vivid and terrifying that she could hardly contain her fear. In her mind's eye, she saw a series of scenes unfold before her, images of past encounters with the Red Cap, each one more harrowing than the last. She watched as brave souls fought valiantly against the only to succumb to its insidious charms in the end. And then, at long last, she beheld a vision so profound that it left her breathless with wonder. The true nature of the Red Cap was revealed to her, an entity born of human fear and desire, unleashed upon the world through centuries-old acts of hubris and betrayal. As she came to terms with this revelation, Laura understood that their quest had never been about finding 3 pure souls or performing a ritual to bind the creature. It was about confronting their own fears and insecurities in order to break free from its grasp once and for all. With newfound clarity, she turned to Marcus and declared, "We are the pure souls you seek, the embodiment of hope in a world beset by fear and despair." With that, they raised their hands to the heavens and recited an ancient incantation, calling upon the power of the universe to help them vanquish the Red Cap once and for all. As the words left their lips, something truly extraordinary happened. The air around them began to shimmer with an otherworldly energy, as if reality itself were being torn asunder by their combined efforts. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the vision disappeared, leaving Laura and Marcus standing there in the dim light of the full moon, forever changed by what they had experienced together. They knew that their quest was far from over, that they would face countless challenges and trials in their ongoing struggle against the forces of darkness. But for now, they could take solace in the knowledge that they were no longer alone on this journey. Together, they left the hidden chamber beneath the estate and made their way back to the world above, ready to face whatever came their way with courage and resolve. As they walked away from the estate, hand in hand, a glimmer of hope pierced the darkness, a guiding light that would lead them on their quest for freedom and redemption. Chapter 4. First Confrontation. Now, as they stood at the edge of the abandoned quarry where the Red Cap was said to reside, Laura felt a chill run down her spine. The temperature had dropped noticeably, and an unnatural stillness settled over the area. Marcus gripped his silver dagger tightly, his knuckles white with tension. They both knew that their careful planning would soon be put to the test as they prepared to face something that defied the laws of nature itself. As the full moon cast its ethereal glow upon them, Laura felt a strange sensation in her gut, a gnawing anxiety that seemed to defy reason. She knew that the time had come for them to face their fears head on, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Marcus sensed her unease and reached out to take her hand. "We are ready," he said softly, his voice thick with determination. "Together, we will confront the Red Cap and put an end to its reign of terror." Laura nodded solemnly, her heart pounding in her chest like a drumbeat. As they walked toward the heart of the property, she could feel the air growing thicker with each step, as if the very atmosphere were being saturated by the fear and desperation that had plagued this place for centuries. Suddenly, without warning, The ground beneath them seemed to shift and tremble like the restless earth of an ancient volcano. Laura staggered back, her eyes wide with terror, as she looked around for some sign of what was happening. But there was no sign, only a feeling that something was terribly wrong. She could feel it in her bones. A palpable sense of malevolence that seemed to emanate from the very core of the earth itself. And then, as if summoned by her own fears, the red cap appeared before them. It stood there in the darkness, a towering figure shrouded in shadows, and swathed in a robe made from the finest. Its face was hidden beneath a hood that seemed to billow with life, its eyes glittering like two black pools of infinite darkness. Laura's heart nearly stopped as she took in the creature's grotesque visage. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, a twisted mockery of humanity, born from the deepest recesses of the human psyche. And yet, there was something strangely familiar about it as well, a haunting echo of 1,000 forgotten nightmares that seemed to reverberate through her very being. She tried to speak, but her voice was caught in her throat like a trapped animal. Marcus, however, had no such difficulty. "You are the Red Cap," he said, his voice steady and sure. "And we have come to confront you." His eyes never left the figure before him, a hulking silhouette cloaked in shadow. The tension between them was palpable, charged with malice and unyielding resolve. Marcus took a deliberate step forward, his hand unconsciously moving to rest on the hilt of his sword. The creature stirred its gaze, burning with an otherworldly intensity that seemed to bore into Marcus's very soul. A low, guttural growl reverberated through the cavern, echoing off the jagged walls and stone floor, a sound that was neither human nor beast, but something far more ancient and malevolent. "Who are you to challenge me?" The red cap spoke, its words crackling with dark power, each syllable carrying an almost physical weight. "I have walked these lands for centuries, spilling blood and sowing fear. What makes you think you can stop me now?" Marcus's jaw clenched, steeling himself against the oppressive aura that surrounded the creature. He knew this confrontation would determine not only his fate, but the safety of countless others. The cavern air grew colder, and a faint green mist began to seep from the ground, wrapping itself around their feet like grasping fingers. The red cap's lips curled into what could only be described as a grin, revealing teeth stained crimson with old blood. "Come then," it hissed. "Let us see if your courage matches your bravado." The creature's hooded head tilted back slightly, as if it were trying to gauge their resolve. "So be it," it hissed, its voice a low guttural growl that seemed to reverberate through the chamber. "Let us see who is stronger, you, with your pitiful knowledge and weak-willed minds, or me, with my timeless power and insatiable hunger for destruction." As they stood there in the darkness, facing off against this monstrous abomination, Laura felt a sudden wave of understanding wash over. She realized then that the red cap was not just some malevolent force to be vanquished. It was the embodiment of all the fear and despair that had plagued this property for centuries. And in confronting it, she was confronting her own deepest fears as well. She drew upon her academic knowledge, searching for some way to understand and potentially survive the threat before them. She knew about the property's violent history, the brutal murders that had taken place here, the countless souls who had been driven mad by their torment. And she knew that these events were not just isolated incidents. They were the very foundation upon which the red cap had been born and nurtured over time. As the creature loomed closer, its eyes burning with a malevolent glow, Laura felt a strange sensation wash over her once more, a feeling of being both utterly alone and intimately connected to the entirety of human experience. She could feel the weight of all the fear and pain that had ever been suffered by mankind, pressing down upon her, as if she were standing at the very center of an invisible vortex of despair. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the confrontation was over. The red cap had retreated back into the shadows, leaving Laura and Marcus to pick up the pieces and try to make sense of what they had just experienced. They stood there in the darkness, their hearts pounding in their chests like drums, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. "We must leave this place," Marcus said finally, his voice shaking with fear and exhaustion. "It is not safe for us here." Laura nodded solemnly, her mind racing as she tried to process all that had transpired. She knew that they could never truly escape the shadow of the red cap, that it would always be there, lurking in the darkness and waiting for its next opportunity to strike. But she also knew that they had gained a measure of insight into the creature's true nature, and that this knowledge could prove to be invaluable in their ongoing battle against evil. As they walked away from the heart of the property, leaving the shadows and darkness behind them, Laura couldn't help but feel a strange sense of hopefulness. She knew that the fight was far from over, that they would have to continue confronting their fears if they were ever to put an end to the Red Cap's reign of terror once and for all. But she also knew that they had made an important first step in their quest for redemption, a journey that would ultimately lead them towards truth, understanding, and perhaps even salvation. And as they walked off into the darkness, hand in hand, hope flickered within her heart like the faintest ember on a long-forgotten hearth. Chapter 5. Secrets Unveiled. As the days passed, Laura and Marcus found themselves increasingly drawn into the mysteries of the property. They spent their time exploring the grounds, delving deep into its history and uncovering a wealth of information that would have been impossible to uncover otherwise. It became apparent that there was much more to this place than met the eye. It was as if the very soil were imbued with a dark and sinister energy that seemed to seep into the very bones of those who dared to venture too close. The local community, they soon discovered, had been intimately connected to the property for generations. Many of its inhabitants had lived here all their lives, their families having roots that stretched back centuries. As Laura and Marcus delved deeper into the history of the place, they began to uncover a web of betrayals, hidden motivations, and long-buried secrets that suggested that the supernatural threat they were facing was part of a much larger and more complex system of violence. They learned that many of the residents had been involved in unspeakable acts of cruelty and violence over the years, acts that had left indelible marks on their souls, forever shaping their relationships with one another and with the world around them. It seemed as though this property had become a kind of breeding ground for evil, a place where the darkest corners of human nature were given free rein to fester and grow unchecked. As they continued to investigate, Laura and Marcus began to notice strange patterns emerging in the local community. There were whispers on the wind, hints of unspoken truths that seemed to speak of deeper connections between the property and those who lived there. They began to suspect that the supernatural threat they were facing was not just some malevolent force that had been summoned from beyond the veil. It was a manifestation of the very darkness at the heart of this community, a reflection of the fear and pain that had long been suppressed beneath the surface. One day, while exploring the depths of the property's underground tunnels, Laura stumbled upon an old diary that belonged to one of the former residents. It was written by a woman named Esther, who lived here during the 1800s. As she read through its pages, Laura found herself confronted with a harrowing account of generational trauma and abuse, as well as a chilling confession that hinted at a deeper, more sinister truth. The diary described how Esther had been subjected to unimaginable cruelty and violence at the hands of her own family members, a legacy of pain and suffering that had been passed down through the generations like a curse. She spoke of the nightmares that had plagued her since childhood, dreams in which she was tormented by shadowy figures who seemed to embody all the anguish and hopelessness that humanity had ever endured. As she read on, Laura found herself increasingly drawn into Esther's story, a tale of betrayal, violence, and unspeakable horror that seemed to mirror her own experiences with the Red Cat. She began to understand that the property was not just a physical location. It was a manifestation of the collective trauma and pain that had been buried deep within the souls of those who lived here, a dark and twisted reflection of the fear and despair that had long been suppressed beneath the surface. Marcus, too, was beginning to feel the weight of this darkness pressing down upon him. He could sense it in the air, a palpable presence that seemed to fill every corner of the property. And as he delved deeper into its history and mysteries, he began to realize just how deep the rabbit hole went, how many layers of darkness there were to be uncovered before they could truly begin to understand the nature of the threat they were facing. As they continued their investigations, Laura and Marcus found themselves confronted with a series of unexpected betrayals and hidden motivations that suggested that the supernatural threat was not just an isolated incident. It was part of a much larger and more complex system of violence. They discovered that many of the residents had been involved in unspeakable acts of cruelty and violence over the years, acts that had left indelible marks on their souls, forever shaping their relationships with one another and with the world around them. They learned, for example, that some members of the community had taken part in satanic rituals and other forms of dark magic in order to gain power over their fellow man. They discovered that others had been involved in secret pacts and alliances with malevolent forces from beyond the veil, forces that had long been waiting for an opportunity to unleash their dark powers upon the world. As they delved deeper into these disturbing revelations, Laura and Marcus began to suspect that the property was not just a breeding ground for evil. It was a nexus point where all the darkness and fear of the world had been allowed to fester and grow unchecked, a place where the very fabric of reality had been torn apart and remade in the image of those who dwelled within its shadowy depths. It was a terrifying realization, one that filled them both with an overwhelming sense of dread and foreboding. They knew now that they were up against something far more powerful and malevolent than anything they had ever encountered before, a darkness that seemed to defy all the laws of physics and logic, a force that had been allowed to fester and grow unchecked for generations. Despite this, Laura and Marcus refused to give up. They knew they had come too far to turn back now. They were determined to uncover the truth about the property and its dark past once and for all. And so, they continued their investigations, delving deeper into the mysteries of the place, until they finally stumbled upon the one thing that held the key to unlocking the secrets of this haunted land. A long-forgotten artifact that had been buried deep within the property's foundations for centuries. It was an ancient relic, a symbol of power and darkness that seemed to resonate with the very essence of the red cap itself. And as they held it in their hands, Laura and Marcus felt a surge of energy and power coursing through their veins, a power that seemed to connect them directly to the source of all the fear and pain that had ever been suffered by mankind. With this newfound knowledge and understanding, they could finally confront the red cap, to banish it back to the shadows from whence it came and restore peace and order to the property once more. But even as they stood triumphant in the face of their foe, Laura and Marcus knew that they had only scratched the surface of this vast and terrible darkness, a darkness that would continue to haunt them for the rest of their lives. For in facing the red cap, they had come face to face with evil itself, a force so powerful and malevolent that it threatened to consume them all whole. As they walked away from the property hand in hand, they knew that they would never be able to truly escape its shadowy grasp, that they would forever bear the scars of their encounter with this dark and terrible power, a reminder of the fear, pain that lay at the heart of this haunted land. Chapter 6. Final Reckoning. As they stood on the edge of the woods, Laura and Marcus felt a surge of energy coursing through their veins. They had finally found the relic that held the key to unlocking the secrets of this haunted land, an ancient artifact buried deep within the heart of the property for centuries. With in hand, they were able to confront the red cap at last, to banish it back to the shadows from whence it came and restore peace and order to the property once more. They stood triumphant in the face of their foe, but Laura and Marcus knew they had only scratched the surface of this vast and terrible darkness. They had faced the very essence of evil itself, a force so powerful and malevolent it threatened to consume them all. As they walked away from the property, hand in hand, they knew that they would forever bear the scars of their encounter with this dark and terrible power, a reminder of the fear and pain that had marked this haunted land. With the artifact in her possession, Laura devised a plan for confronting the red cap once and for all. She knew that it was not just a monster, it was a manifestation of deeper historical violence, a symbol of the oppression and fear that had been allowed to fester and grow unchecked within these woods for generations. She began by researching the folklore surrounding the red cap, the legends and stories passed down through the generations about this haunted land. She discovered that it was not just a creature of darkness, but a powerful symbol of resistance against the oppressive forces that had sought to control these woods for centuries. Using her knowledge of folklore and the supernatural, Laura crafted a series of rituals and spells designed to weaken the red cap's hold over the... She enlisted the help of the remaining members of the community who had not been tainted by the darkness that surrounded them. People like Mr. Thompson, the elderly historian who knew more about the history of the land than anyone else, or Mrs. Carter, the wise and empathetic woman who had been the driving force behind the community's efforts to preserve their heritage. Together, they worked tirelessly for weeks, performing rituals and spells in secret to weaken the red cap's power. They gathered ingredients from deep within the woods, herbs and roots that were said to possess powerful magical properties. They chanted ancient incantations and performed sacred dances, all in an effort to banish the darkness that had taken root within these woods. But even as they worked tirelessly to weaken the red cap's hold over the property, Laura knew that they could not simply rely on magic and ritual alone. They needed a strategy, a plan for defeating the red cap that went beyond typical supernatural confrontations. So she devised a plan that was as much psychological as physical. a strategy designed to expose the true nature of the creature and force it to reveal its weaknesses. She knew that the red cap fed on fear and suffering, drawing its power from the pain of others. So, she set out to gather as much information about the creature's victims as possible, to learn their stories and understand what had driven them to seek the protection of this haunted land. Through her research, Laura uncovered a pattern. Most of the victims had been targets of oppression and injustice, people who had been pushed to the margins of society, forced to live in fear and suffering as they struggled to survive in a world that seemed determined to keep them down. And, in each case, the red cap had appeared at their moment of greatest need, offering them protection and power in exchange for their loyalty and obedience. Armed with this knowledge, Laura set out to confront the red cap once more, to force it to reveal its true nature and expose the deeper historical trauma at the heart of its power. She knew that she would have to be cunning and strategic in her approach, using every bit of information she had gathered about the creature's weaknesses to gain an advantage over. As she stood on the edge of the woods, ready to confront the red cap one last time, Laura felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that this would be their final reckoning, the moment when they would either succeed in banishing the darkness from these woods for good or be consumed by it entirely. With a deep breath, she stepped forward into the shadows of the woods and called out to the red cap, demanding that it reveal its true nature and face the consequences of its actions once and for all. At first, there was only silence, an oppressive hush that seemed to press in on them from all sides. But then, as if responding to her call, a figure emerged from the darkness, a towering figure cloaked in black robes, with glowing red eyes that seemed to pierce right through her soul, locked in a battle of wills, each trying to gain an advantage over the other. But as the seconds ticked by, Laura began to feel a strange sense of familiarity rising up within her. She realized the red cap was not just a monster. It was a part of her own history, a symbol of the oppression and fear that had driven her ancestors to seek refuge in these woods all those years ago. With this knowledge came a newfound sense of resolve. She would not be defeated by the darkness that surrounded her. She would not allow it to consume her or the people she loved. She would face it head-on, using every bit of information and skill at her disposal to banish it from these woods for good. And so, armed with their newfound knowledge and a renewed sense of purpose, Laura and Marcus led the remaining members of the community in a final showdown against the red cap. They performed ancient rituals and spells, chanting incantations that seemed to resonate throughout the woods. And as they worked together, drawing on the power of their love and friendship to overcome the darkness that surrounded them, they began to feel a change taking hold within their hearts, a sense of hope and possibility that had been missing for far too long. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the red cap relented. Its power weakened by the combined efforts of the community, it retreated back into the shadows, leaving behind only a sense of peace and tranquility in its wake. As they stood there, surrounded by the beauty of the woods, Laura and Marcus felt a rush of elation and reprieve course through them. They knew their task was far from complete, that they would have to keep working together to safeguard the heritage and history of this land for future generations. But for now, at least they could savor their triumph over the shadow that had threatened to engulf everyone. As they walked away from the woods that day, hand in hand once more, Laura and Marcus knew they had found something truly special. Within those trees, a sense of purpose and belonging that had been missing from their lives for far too long. As they looked out across the horizon, towards a future filled with promise and possibility, they felt a profound gratitude for the people who had come before them, the generations of strong-willed individuals who had fought against the darkness, threatened to consume their world, for it was through their struggle and sacrifice that Laura and Marcus had learned the true meaning of love, friendship, and community, the values that would guide them as they sought to build a brighter future for themselves and the people they loved. And with this knowledge, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead, confident in the knowledge that they were never truly alone.